Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Amy Rifat. I am a private sector specialist with IFC's employability team, Vitae, and I will be moderating this session. Today, we have an important topic for you, that is gender equality and how you, as an education institution, can address the gender gap in education and employment. There's a lot of research, sure you have access to and have heard about, illustrating the gap on enrollment in certain education programs, employment rates, salary levels, and attaining senior positions for women. And we know that you, the audience, care about your students and want them to have the best opportunity possible in the workplace, regardless of their gender. So in this webinar, you will learn about what the research and data is actually telling us about this gender gap, how education institutions and the private sector are thinking about this, what they are doing to address it, and how you as an institution can move forward on closing this gender gap. We have a great panel of speakers for you. I am delighted to introduce them. We have Hiromichi Katayama. He is the Program Specialist for Youth Literacy and Skills Development at UNESCO. He coordinates the development of skills assessment and anticipation in the Middle East and North Africa region, and the advancement of technical and vocational education management information systems in sub-Saharan Africa. And he also leads UNESCO's TIVET policy reviews around the world. Welcome, Hiromichi. And so we have Sonola Daly. She is the gender lead for manufacturing, agribusiness, services, health, and education at the International IFC, International Finance Corporation, IFC. She advises IFC's private sector clients on how to integrate gender equality into their operations through effective and sustainable solutions. And then we have our own Dina Nicholas, and she is the global lead for the employability program, Vitae, at IFC. She manages the assessments and implementation plans to improve employability at higher education institutions all over the globe. As usual, we will have our Q&A session at the end, so I encourage you to send your questions in the chat box and the Q&A box below on your screens during the discussion, and we will get to them at the end. Now, before I move to our speakers, I just wanted to make an announcement that I think will be interesting to everyone in the audience. IFC is hosting an education conference in March, between the 6th and 7th of March in New Mexico City. We will be sharing the link to the website with all the information and how to register for that in the chat box here. So please keep that on your files for viewing later. We think a lot of you might be interested in joining that. Thank you. So now let's delve into our discussion. And I would like to start with you, Dina. How would you describe the gender problem on a global level when it comes to education and employment, just to frame the issue and what the problem is?
Thanks, Amy. Good morning, everybody. So I think what we would start with is to say that, first of all, women are now a majority on university campuses globally. So in the United States, for example, 58% of undergraduates are female. The numbers are similar for Canada and the EU. Countries such as China, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, South Africa have a majority of females enrolled in tertiary education, right? So this is all to say that women are an important constituency for universities, right? This isn't a small minority of students. This is actually most students on an increasing number of campuses. And I want to say that the growth in female enrollment really hasn't been at the expense of male students. In an overall picture of growing enrollments, what we see is that women are just, their enrollments are just growing faster, right? So there's this sharp increase, which has driven a shift in the gender balance and resulted in campuses with a majority of female students. Now, this is a global phenomenon. We do see a difference in sub-Saharan Africa, but again, the enrollment rates of women in sub-Saharan Africa are also increasing. And over time, we would expect Africa to match the trends that we're seeing in the rest of the world. So there's been a lot of focus and effort to ensure parity in access to education. This is really important. And it's also given us a lot of data on who's enrolling in education at all levels, including tertiary. But it raises an interesting question. What happens when these students leave? To what extent are university-educated women seeing the same opportunities when they're entering labor markets as men? How are they navigating entry into the labor market, and do they have particular challenges? So IFC's Vitae program works with universities to put in place practices that support student employability. And as part of the methodology that we use, we host, together with the university, a survey of students and a survey of graduates. For many institutions that we work with, this is the first time that they've systematically surveyed their graduate students. So there's always a lot of excitement around the results. But, you know, usually we take that data and we input it into the report and the feedback for a particular university. Now what we've done is we've taken that entire data set and we've aggregated it. We now have 14,600 graduates that have responded to the same survey across 23 countries. Now, there's a focus on emerging markets here, which I think is really important because emerging markets really don't have a lot of data, maybe any data, on employment outcomes, specifically for women. So what do we see when we're looking at our database? I would say that really global trends, there's three key differences between men and women graduates. So first of all, women university graduates are disproportionately less likely to be employed full-time. They are less likely to be employed in their field of study, and they're more likely to say that they're unemployed and looking for work. So that's really important. We don't just ask, are you employed or unemployed? We ask whether you're looking. So women are more likely to say that they're unemployed and looking for work. So the first set of differences we see is in employment outcomes. Now, the second set of differences that we see, and these are pretty stark differences, is really on salary outcomes and wages. So on average, women earn less. When we saw this finding, we kind of said, okay, well, that makes sense, right? Because women are also disproportionately more likely to over-enroll in lower paying fields that require a tertiary education. So nursing and allied health, teaching, social work, communications, and media. So we're seeing, of course, in our data set that women are more likely to be in the bottom of the salary distribution, but we originally thought, well, that's just because, you know, they're studying in fields that lead to relatively lower paying jobs. But what was really bizarre is when we took the data set and we aggregated it or disaggregated it by field of study. So we looked just at ICT graduates, just at engineering graduates, just at, you know, health, social sciences, humanities, you name it. We found the same pattern. So a woman graduating from university with an ICT degree is disproportionately more likely to be in the lower end of the salary distribution. So that was a bizarre and frankly surprising finding that we didn't expect as a team. So then we looked at the data set again and we said, okay, well, let's really control for age. We know that women in our data set are younger. Let's control for years of relevant work experience. But again, when we looked at these factors and we just were comparing apples to apples, so women versus men that have, let's say, 3 to 5 years of work experience, again, women disproportionately more likely to be in the lower end of the salary distribution. So salary outcomes and wages, the differences between men and women university graduates in our data set are very, very stark. And then finally, the third set of differences is sort of what we call ROI. So women are less likely to believe that the benefits of attending their institution outweigh the costs to themselves and their families. They're more likely to be skeptical about that kind of statement. Also, women are more likely to say that the university experience didn't meet their expectations. So these three, I would say, kind of buckets of differences: employment outcomes, salary outcomes and wages, as well as return on investment. We see differences, significant and demonstrable differences in the data set between the results and the responses of men and women. So this is something for universities to definitely reflect on.
Right, yes, and as you said, women are constituting now 50%, if not more, of student bodies, and they're reporting that they're not satisfied with what they're getting. No. Okay, thank you, Dina. Sanola, I'd like to move to you and ask about a different set of data that and tell us what the issue is there. So what's the IFC's experience telling us through the work you're doing with the private sector and gender? And what the differences you're seeing on employment, salary, and progression?
Right, thank you. Thanks. And I think Dina really set the stage very well regarding what we're seeing as the students graduate from universities, because this is the context in which IFC's clients are operating in. So we know that from World Bank data that the female labor force participation gap is around 53%, right? So 53% of women are in the formal labor force. Again, if we're seeing that more women are graduating from university than men, but they're not in the labor market, there are regional differences, and there are some differences that explain why. So in Egypt, for example, we're seeing that female labor force participation is about 16%. In Jordan, it's about 15%. Mexico, it's about 48%. Nigeria, about 52%, and Ghana, about 67%. And I'm bringing this up because then it shows the context in which the companies are operating. So then the companies are looking at how can we better recruit and retain employees when we're seeing issues around norms, for example, regional expectations around women's participation in the workforce, and then their ability to retain them. So we're seeing from the work that we're doing that in some regions, our clients are having the data is reflective of the client experience in the workforce. They have fewer women on average, depending again on the sector. So in the garment sector, for example, our clients on average have about 80% female employees. In some sectors, you mentioned healthcare. Globally, the data is around 80% female employees again in healthcare. Some of our clients is closer to 58%. In retail, it's closer to also 58%. And then, if you're looking at manufacturing of other things like cement, chemicals, glass, the numbers of women in the workforce drop down to about 5%. So it really also depends on the sector. So we're looking at the company in which the country in which the company is operating, the region in which, the sector in which, and those are the factors that show up in the workplace dynamics. We know that there are fewer women in senior and middle management. We see that from the global data. So again, some of the employment outcomes that Dina is speaking about, we see in the global data that there's a drop off in the percentage of women in female in middle and senior management. So globally, we're looking at in East Asia Pacific about 30%, in LAC about 40%, and in the Middle East, North Africa about 24%. We're seeing that data and those similarities with the clients that we're working with. And we're working with clients who have self-selected to work on gender issues. And even then, we're seeing that there's lower representation, for example, in the C-suite. For example, I'll just give you, one example. We're seeing, for example, 58% of the people working in retail are women, but only 9% of the C-suite members in retail are women. So those are the kinds of drop-offs that we're seeing in terms of, sector differences, regional differences, etc. And it's important because we'll have clients, for example, a hospital in Egypt say, we know that it's important for us to have more women doctors. We know we've seen the research that says that having more female doctors really helps with patient outcomes, with their experience, with their loyalty. But we can't recruit female doctors. How can we change this? We're operating in a context where it might not be considered good for women to work, or it doesn't look good for their families. So how do we change that as an employer? And so helping the companies to understand the cultural context in which they're working and to put in place measures to address that are a part of the work that we do. The second thing I wanted to mention is what you said about the pay gap. And Dina mentioned, controlling for pay and researching for pay. We know that globally, the ILO estimates that women are paid on average 20% less than men. And again, that varies by region, right? So in Pakistan, that's closer to 45% to 40%. In Sierra Leone, it's about closer to 40%. And then in places like Costa Rica, it's 7%. So again, it really varies by region, it varies by the country, the economic conditions in the country as well. And so we see those tendencies also show up in the workplace. And a part of the analysis that we try to do with our clients is to look at the gender pay gap. So we take it down from the macro level. We take everything from the macroeconomic level back down to the individual company level and see with them, what are the gender dynamics in the pay in your company and what are the policies you have. So those are some of the ways that, this shows up in the workplace with our clients.
Okay.
Thank you.
So yeah, the information, the data is consistent across different sets of data. And it's great to hear that some companies actually want to work on this issue. That's an opportunity for our audience, and we'll come to that later. But very quickly, how do you gather this information from clients?
Sure. So when we work with clients, IFC gathers data on looking at the workplace and the workplace dynamics. So we look at the data under talent flows, for example. How many men and women do you have across the company in different levels in profit and loss responsibility versus support functions? Do you have, we look at how many people are recruited, how many people leave the company during a certain time period. And we just try to understand what their internal dynamics are when it comes to talent flows. We also look at the policies and practices that the company offers in terms of benefits and programs for the employees. And then we also speak with the employees in every assessment we do. For example, for advisory, we do interviews, we do surveys or focus groups, and we try to get the employee's voice and experience back into that analysis so that we can give the company a complete picture of what their numbers say, what their policies say, and what their people say. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks. That's very helpful. So Hiromichi, I'd like to come to you. So as Dina and Sonona have both pointed out in their research that it indicates there's a gender gap when it comes to employment, even though much has been done to address the gender gap when it comes to education. So what are your thoughts on that based on UN data? And where have the gaps been closed, and where do you see where we still need to improve our efforts?
Okay, thank you, Amy. Yeah, so I'm sharing my views based on the data published by the UNESCO Institute for Statistics and also some of our recent publications. But I think I will more or less repeat the key points mentioned by Dina and Sanola. So first of all, I would like to mention the enrollment and access to the educations. So if you look at the gross enrollment ratio in different education levels, yeah, it is true that in some countries and some regions, they are reaching the parity between men and women. But in some regions, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa, the opportunities for female to have an access to the education is still low. For example, the gross enrollment ratio for the secondary education in sub-Saharan Africa for female is 42%, while the same rate for male is 47%. And if you look at since I have been working on the technical and vocational education and training in Tibet, so if you look at this level of education, Tibet, still the percentage of female enrolled in Tibet programs are limited. So according to the recent publication that we produced with the World Bank and ILO, out of 45% of female students enrolled in any types of education in sub-Saharan Africa, only 25% are enrolled in Tibet programs, which means the female students are relatively limited opportunities for the acquisition of practical skills that they can be employed in the labor market. And I would also like to mention the learning achievement. So it's not a UNESCO data, but I mean, OECD has just released the PISA. It's a learning achievement of 15-year-old students. So according to that data, there is a clear difference between boys and girls. So boys are relatively better in mathematics and science subjects, while girls are better in readings. And I think it reflects on their career choice and also their choice of the study in the universities and higher educations. So if you look at the enrollment of the female students and male students, there are relatively smaller number of female students who are enrolled in the science field and the engineering field, and females are majority in terms of the humanity fields in the universities. And also, according to some of the findings from our recent studies, the investing in science education will contribute to the economic growth. I think that's the data obtained from the European countries. And also some of the high-paying jobs are relatively male-dominated in many countries, and it requires practical skills that you can obtain from the Tibet schools, or it requires the foundation of science and the engineering field. And it seems to us that the females are less advantageous situations because of the characteristics that we have observed in the educational training systems. So we think, we as an expert of the education, educational training systems, we believe that we have to have a holistic interventions covering from the basic education to Tibet and higher education systems, so that we should encourage more and more female students to be enrolled in the STEM, science and engineering subjects, and we have to encourage more and more female students to be enrolled in the Tibet students, so that they can have an equal opportunities to find job opportunities in the labor market. Thank you.
Okay, so a lot has been done on education equality, but there's still more for us to work on, especially within STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, because not only are women not getting into this because of their level on maths, before they're not achieving on maths, but when they do, as Dina said, they're getting paid less. But I'd like to come to the point, Hiromichi, that you mentioned that women actually don't apply to this as much as men. There are fewer women in this, and mainly because they lag behind on maths at school, if I understand correctly. Could you elaborate on that, and could you talk about how we could solve this problem? Is the UNESCO doing anything on this? Would, for example, a foundation year focused on maths and science help erase this barrier?
Yes, thank you very much. So again, from the recent publication of these areas, the problem and the challenges faced by the female students are complex, and we have to make the more holistic interventions in order to mitigate these challenges. So first of all, the individual choice is important. So the individual female, it depends on the individual female intervention. So we may need to encourage more and more female students to be enrolled, first of all, to have more interest in these areas, and also to encourage them to choose these areas if they want to pursue the advanced level of studies. So this is the first layer. And also the family and parents are very strong determinants. So we have to make an intervention for the family, especially for their parents, so that they don't have a traditional bias toward the role of men and women, and so that they can exploit the full potential of their children's, be it for boys or girls. And also the school level intervention will be needed. The teachers will play a key role for their future career choices, and also the future choices of the advanced level of studies. So we have to make some intervention by targeting teachers. And also in some schools, they provide a career guidance, even from the primary education levels. And it is more important at the secondary level and the TVET institutions. So we have to provide an opportunities for update their knowledge, and also the capacity of the career guidance practitioners at the educational and training institutions. And also we will need to make some interventions at the social levels, because the traditional role of men and women will depends on the social and cultural norms. So the UNESCO have we have been organizing the awareness raising campaigns in view of with a view to changing the traditional social and cultural norms, and so that more and more female students are coming into these areas.
Thanks, Hiromichi. Yeah, so it would be, so we were saying we need multiple level interventions for this, which makes sense at the individual level, the family level, the school level, and the social level, society level. But at the school level, you brought up the idea of career guidance and the importance of that, whether at school or university. And I'd like to move to you, Dina, on this. Because I know there's evidence globally that women and men approach the job market differently in terms of the way they apply to jobs, the way they approach employers, the way they negotiate salaries. And do you think that is playing a role in the outcomes you mentioned above? What are you seeing in this respect?
So indeed, there's quite a bit of evidence actually out there that women and men interact with the job market differently. So one point is that women are less likely to feel that they can negotiate their salary for a job. So some employers have moved towards actually putting a bullet into job applications saying salaries can be negotiated. Apparently, that's something, according to the evidence, that increases the likelihood that women will apply and that women will negotiate salary if selected for a position. So there's quite a bit of evidence around this. The other point is, just applying for jobs. So women are less likely to apply for stretch positions. They do look to ensure that they're fitting all or nearly all of the criteria before submitting an application. So especially when people are younger, right? Some of these things affect the way that they interact with job markets. So being aware of this data for career services professionals, for guidance counselors is really, really important. But the other thing that's happening with career services, of course, is that it's increasingly technology driven. And so what that allows is personalization, right? Career services can now look at each student as an individual in an efficient way and understand that individual's strengths and weaknesses, and then work to address those strengths and weaknesses. So I think this is a really good time for career and guidance counselors to be aware of potential differences between male and female students and the way that they would interact with the job market. And there are efficient ways to really identify those strengths and weaknesses and begin to address them.
Okay, great. So you talked about what universities can do in that respect. Is there on career services, is there anything else you think education institutions can do to address these problems, the gender gap / the way women apply? What else can they do?
So generally, if we're looking at ways that universities can help to solve disparities, the most important thing is really step one is collecting your own data on graduate outcomes, right? I mean, many universities may collect data and find that they don't have a disparity, right? Maybe men and women are accessing labor markets in the same way. There's no difference in salaries. There's no difference in employment outcomes. But until you have your own data, you're really kind of moving blind, right? You're not able to make evidence-based decisions in this area. So making sure that you collect your own data on graduate outcomes and you analyze that data to see if there are differences between males and females, but also between other demographics of your student body is really the first step. And it's kind of a starting block for anything else that you would do. We also know that, some of the career services tech that I was talking about earlier, right? Everything from Handshake to, 1220 to Simplicity, just a few of the larger, maybe more well-known brands, they also have a graduate survey functionality built in, right? So if you're already looking at career services technology to personalize and individualize the experience for your students, you have a built-in way of going ahead and collecting data on graduate outcomes and graduate satisfaction that will continue to improve the way that you can address this issue. So that's kind of two ways that are relatively straightforward and I would say almost hassle-free for the university, right? This is a good starting point. There are additional things that you can also do. So I guess this is 3 now. Number 3 would be just working differently with employers, right? So create relationships with your major employers. And to the points that Sonola was addressing, many employers are also looking at ways to consider employing women differently. Find these employers and help them to build a case for doing this. Make sure that you know who's employing your graduates. Make sure that employers also have a seat at the table when you're looking to revise or make changes to your curriculum, right? This is going to help not only female students, but also male students. Just make sure that employers are able to give feedback in a systematic way to the curriculum. Also, encourage more work-integrated learning opportunities. We see that women tend to be younger and they tend to have fewer years of work experience when they enter university, at least looking at the universities that we've worked with. So if that's the case, if you're seeing this in your data as well, perhaps work-integrated learning will disproportionately benefit female students and help them to get some work experience while they're studying. There's a number of other things. I mean, there's quite simple things like just being aware of any disparities in the gender mix between your student population and your faculty, especially by discipline, right? And this could be something that benefits males as well as females. Just be aware if there's if there's a disbalance there and see whether at your university the trade-offs are worth it for trying to rebalance that, right? It may not be a short-term solution, but awareness is really the beginning to some of these changes. And then finally, curriculum interventions such as micro-credentials, especially for, let's say, broader disciplines. Helping students to get a top-up or to continue education
Mhm.
with micro-credentials that are oriented towards working in a specific field, administrative assistant medical, for example. These kinds of things can help to give your students a leg up in the job market, both female and male students, an advantage in the job market because they have a way of focusing their degree to a particular sector or particular field. So these are some of the things that we're seeing universities doing.
Right. Thanks, Tina. So there are loads of things that our audience can start thinking about and doing to address this inequality at the university level. Now let's hear what the employers are doing to close this gap, because that would also be beneficial for our audience, since working with employers is very important for this, as you just mentioned, Dina. So, Sanola, could you tell us a bit about what you actually do with employers to close these gender gaps, whether it's on employment rates, the pay difference, the upward movements, or any other issues?
Certainly. And I think Dina laid it out really well, the importance of data and the importance of taking data from a macro level and really bringing it down to the company. What does your data look like? What is your own individual, we call it business case, right? Why should you work on this and what does this look like for you? Once we're able to provide the client with that data and help them do some benchmarking against competitors, for example, and help them look at the trends internally and see where the actual gender gaps are. So sometimes we'll think there's a gap in one area and it's not in that area, or the client will think that they're doing, they're focusing a program on one area and it's not needed in that area, it's needed somewhere else. So we're able to really showcase what the dynamics are and then build with the company what the strategies can be and the solutions. For example, if we're finding that there is an opportunity we're losing women, for example, at a certain level in the company, what can we do to fix what we call the leaky pipeline there, right? So if women are getting promoted, but then they're leaving at a certain level, how can we do an intervention around that area? Is it mentoring? We talk a lot about mentoring programs. Is it a sponsorship program, which goes a little bit further than mentoring? Do you have flexible work arrangements? Are you losing people? And again, this happens to both men and women, but are you losing people because of a lack of flexibility or a lack of policies that would accommodate for work and life integration? Are people able to see what their correct career paths in the company can be? And if they're not able to see that, are they being wooed away by the competitor because you're not, giving that transparency? If it's on pay, for example, letting the employees know what the issues are and then looking at ways to address this. So doing some data analysis, Dina did some rigor there on, the controlling for different factors. Clients can do that as well, control for different factors around pay. And we have one of the programs we do, which is a certification program that enables clients to go really deeply into those controls and see where the issues are, and then communicate that back and actually address the issues. And I'll mention one more thing that can come up. Respectful workplaces. If we find, for example, that a company is losing employees because they feel that they're being harassed in the workplace, or they feel like there is nowhere to, give feedback on the culture of the workplace, they're more likely to leave. So what can the company put in place? Respectful workplace mechanisms, trainings, different solutions like that to address those issues. And I'll mention just two more: childcare and paternity leave. What we've seen sometimes is that clients may offer benefits to women for childcare, but they don't offer them to working parents. So men can't access them. So thinking about that. And then on paternity leave, same thing. We may offer maternity leave, but we don't offer paternity leave. And what we want to encourage is equity in the workplace. So these are some of the solutions that clients can think through and act on in terms of addressing some of those issues around retention of employees and also recruitment of employees.
Right. And what are the benefits of working on gender for companies? Because I think this argument would help the universities and the colleges when they try to work with them? Why should they even care about this?
That's an excellent question. Again, we go back to this concept of the business case, right? What's in it for the company? So it depends on, we know, again, macro research says that companies with greater diversity in the company and also in leadership have better business performance. What we try to break that down for our clients is quantifying what that actually means for them in terms of their business case. So we can do projections around, for example, absenteeism and turnover. So, people missing work without explanation or without having requested leave, and how that affects productivity. Turnover leads to, turnover being, voluntary exits from the company. That leads to costs associated with recruiting new employees, training up new employees. So there are labor costs that are really associated to that. So helping the companies to understand what, for example, those rotation numbers look like and how they can address them and what the costs are is really important. That's one area. But another area is really on business opportunity, right? So we know, let's take again the garment sector. We know that a lot of the global brands really are tied into what their consumers believe on sustainability, both on people and on the planet. If the companies that we're working with who are supplying these brands are able to systematically address gender issues within their workplaces, that makes them an attractive supplier to a larger brand who's focused on responsible sourcing. So that has, real bottom line implications for who you partner with, who do you do business with, the revenue that you can attract, right? So revenue attraction, but also retention when it comes to your labor costs. It's also about new opportunities, new markets to enter, innovation. And we're seeing this in really concrete terms. We had a dairy client, for example, start a whole new business because of some of the work that we found in their value chains around gender dynamics. They were able to start a different product and a different business line. So they're real tangible benefits to companies to address these issues, as well as risk management, right? So risk management continues to be really important for doing business. So they're an employer brand as well, and the company brand. So they're really tangible benefits to the companies if they're systematic about understanding this as core strategy and not not a nice thing to do, but really central to how their business operates. So that's how we talk to the clients about this, and that's how we work with them as employers. Thanks.
Okay, great. So great to hear there's research behind that. And are employers interested in working with universities on this topic? Have you seen, and if so, what's the best way for universities to approach employers on this topic? Because as we heard from Dina, and Dina will be able to tell you a lot about this, it's difficult to create that relationship, reaching out. These are busy people.
So I really believe this is a strong area of opportunity, and I completely agree with Dina. I think one key way, and maybe the first way, is to work first on the relationship and then embed gender into the conversation. And I think this can be actually a multidimensional approach from the university. So on the one hand, yes, we're looking at career services and career opportunities. We know that more and more companies are looking into diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ask the companies about that. See what they're doing in these areas. What do they need? How can the university also support them in this area? I think if we start to build a partnership around the concept, around the research, around the data, then it's easier to have that conversation, but also as a part of the bigger relationship with the company. I'm gonna go two sides on this. On one side, companies are looking into this. They want to train employees on this. They want to train their higher executives on this. Again, building the university or the higher education institution's brand around this topic, around being innovative in this area, about being proactive, around doing things for their students and alumni in this area, and then letting the employers know about it. I think that is a really important way to really move this agenda forward, but also having the employers know that you are educating your students and alumni on these issues. We talked about pay and negotiation, right? If career services is providing negotiation workshops for their students and their alumni, bringing that back into the conversation with the employers. How can you as an employer encourage negotiation or be transparent about pay scales, about how you're institutionalizing these processes? So having that dialogue, I think, is really important, and finding a way to just have this be a part of that partnership. And so that it doesn't feel like it's something extra, it doesn't feel like it's something different. It's also just a part of the relationship between the university and the employers. So I think that would be my first suggestion around how to do this. And I'll mention one thing. We know of a client that is a university, no, I'm sorry, a pharmaceutical company, and they are partnering with universities to look at research, specifically in the STEM areas. And they have now a prize for female researchers that universities and others can benefit from. So there are different ways to partner on this topic. So I think that would be how I'd package that between the universities and the employers, and then, embed career services and that in that relationship as well.
Right. Thank you, Sonora. And I know you as a team are putting together a working group. You're launching a working group. I think it would be good if you could share some information about that with the audience before I move, because I think this is a good context for that.
Certainly. Thank you so much. So yes, we are planning as IFC to work with our education clients. We're going to reach out to the clients to understand their interest in this topic. We'll be sending out a survey in the following days to see client engagement. But we're launching a working group, which will be launched at the conference in Mexico City that you mentioned earlier. And the idea around this is to work with our clients to go over a few of these topics more in detail around gender and inclusion in higher education, specifically looking at, as Hiromichi mentioned, STEM and access to STEM, the impact of digital and online learning right now in terms of access and opportunity, the ability for working with employers more on career services for the alumni, and engagement, recruitment, and partnerships with the employers. So we'll be covering a range of topics, looking at all the challenges and barriers that we've been discussing, and the data around gender and inclusion in higher education and the transition into the labor market, and how we can help smooth this process and learn from this. We have some clients that are doing some really interesting and innovative work already as universities on this topic. And so we'd like to share lessons learned and best practices and figure out how we with our clients can partner to implement changes and actions that will really make a difference. So we're looking forward to that. And thank you for mentioning it. We'll send some information to the participants after the webinar. Thank you.
Excellent. I was just going to say, yeah, where can participants get information? Great. Okay, and then I have a last question for Hiromichi before we move to our Q&A. In your opinion, Hiromichi, what do universities and technical training institutions need to do to address this gender gap? Obviously, you have, from your work. Could you also share some examples from around the world where universities or TVETs have collaborated with the private sector on addressing this? And specifically, if you have examples on STEM where we've identified as a big gap, that would be great.
Okay, thank you, Amy. So whenever we conduct a kind of situation analysis of the training systems, and also we prepared our own technical assistance programs for the countries, we are trying to have a consultation. Of course, our main target is the training institutions and education institutions. So that's our main focus, but we will try to ensure the dialogue with the social partners, including the industries, Chamber of Commerce, enterprises, and workers' organizations and trade unions. And especially when we talk about TVET vocational trainings, we have to ensure the inclusion of the practical programs, including the work-based learning. So the partnership with the local enterprises would be very important. And we'd like to ensure the insertion of the internship programs and on-the-job training programs, etc. So I'd like to say that the partnership with the private sector is very important. And just briefly, I led the study, the situational analysis in Mongolia just before the COVID crisis. So the Mongolia, we see, like other former socialist countries, the female participation in education is very high. Actually at the tertiary education levels, there are more female students than male students. But when it comes to the labor market participations, the females are facing a lot of challenges. And mining industries, they provide highest paying jobs in Mongolia, but it is a male dominated industries, and the female are difficult to join these areas. And also some of the policies provide a kind of disincentives for female, like the mandatory retirement age for men and women are different, and the females tend to retire to make the retirement, and they tend to receive the pensions earlier. And also government are providing subsidy for the child cares for females. But because of the generosity subsidies, I see that I heard that some of the females are not really willing to enter into the labor market. So I'd like to say that the challenge is not really addressed, not only can be addressed by the education systems. So you have to have a holistic view, and you have to work with the other relevant ministries and other relevant systems as well in order to mitigate the challenge of the female employment. So, sorry, I just want to briefly mention, since you asked some practical example of UNESCO-supported programs. So in Malawi, with the funding of the European Union, we have provided a technical support for the education Tibet systems. And mitigating the gender differences is one of our priority. So what we have been doing was we have developed the code of conduct for instructors and also administrative staff for reducing the gender-based violence. So this is the new code of conduct and administrative staff and students for the gender-based violence has been introduced, and it has already been operational in Malawi. So I would say that this is one of the achievements of UNESCO supported technical assistance in Southern Africa. And also we have been working with the private sectors, especially since the beginning of the COVID pandemic under the framework of the GEC, the Global Education Coalitions. I understand that IFC will be becoming a new member of this Global Education Coalition. But I just want to make one example of UNESCO-sponsored activities in partnership with DO, the private companies. So in 50 countries, UNESCO and DO, we provided the mentoring and coaching programs by targeting the female students and to develop their leadership skills and entrepreneurship skills. And I think somebody said the needs for the negotiation, the skills for negotiation with the employers, etc. So those components were addressed by the coaching and mentoring programs sponsored by UNESCO and DO for the more than 50 countries so far. So so in short, this is some of the examples supported by UNESCO. Thank you.
Okay, great. So so you're basically, there are obviously societal, cultural problems that beyond the level of the universities or any education system, but where they can play a role is partnering sometimes with private sector companies like the UNESCO Dior partnership to help women move in this aspect, or something very different like policies on gender-based violence and making sure that your instructors are very aware of that and how to deal with it. Thank you, Hiromichi. So I'd like to go to our Q&A now. So I see a couple. Okay, there's one maybe on this, Hiromichi, for you, and that's how can education institutions collaborate with UNESCO on these initiatives that you mentioned to increase gender participation?
Yes, so usually we are providing a technical support in response to the request received by our member states. So in each countries we have a national commissions and the correspondence of the coordination with UNESCO, and mainly in many countries they are based in the Ministry of Education. So I mean, whenever we receive that kind of request from our member countries, member states, we should be able to provide some support. Usually the policy advice and also the technical assistance or capacity development support, etc. So yes, I hope you have my email address, and yeah, if you can send me an email after this webinar, I should be able to provide you with more details. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Yes, your LinkedIn is attached to the invites. Okay, there is another commenting question here that I see about that underestimating emerging markets. Some institutions have comprehensive employability data of their graduates. I don't think we're denying that, but I think some of them don't. And maybe I'll hand over to Dina because she's more aware of the global level of this in all the emerging markets. So if you would like to address that, Dina, and then there's a follow-up question.
Sure.
Okay, but
Sure, I mean, just to, of course, some institutions are already tracking their graduate outcomes. They're reporting on the data. If you look at a number of institutions, they actually report publicly on their website about employment rates and average salaries for recent graduates or typical graduates of a particular field. This kind of information is really, really important for all, incoming students, so that they're aware of what employment and salary wage outcomes look like, either for a typical faculty, right, or for the university as a whole. So I realize that there are a number of institutions that are doing this. There's a number of institutions that we work with that do this very, very well already. I would say that there's still more the exception than the rule, but I know that this is a trend that is, that is really taking hold, and more institutions are interested about having this data. So of course.
Okay, thank you, Dina. And then an add-on question related to what you suggested on career services. Could you share a strategy to include female students? Like, what are the specific services to be added to the usual career services menu to include women? And I think you touched upon this, but maybe you could elaborate.
I did, and maybe what I'll actually say, given kind of where we are in the timing, is that together with UNESCO, we will be producing a publication that looks at the data set that IFC has collected with Vitae, and that specifically profiles universities that have specific policies to address gaps between male and female employment outcomes and wage outcomes, and etc. So that's coming. It's a couple of weeks off, but that's something that we will have out around the time of the education conference in early March. So I would say that at this point. Let me add, actually, because the other thought on that is that, however, I haven't seen a lot of data on what works, right? So what I've seen is examples of what institutions are doing, but what is it actually better to do based on data and evidence? And I think this goes back to the early part of the conversation where I said, look, access to education has been a major and important focus for a number of years now. Increasingly, we're asking the questions of, do we have data on outcomes, right? Now that we have quite a lot of data on access, and we can kind of, we can see what's happening globally at a relatively specific level, how do we try to get the same type of information on outcomes? What is the evidence that you should be doing X rather than Y in order to improve female graduate outcomes, right? And so that kind of data is very difficult to find. There's not a lot of that, but specific measures that universities are taking is something that we will definitely profile in the upcoming report.
And if I could just maybe add to the tighter
Mm.
partnerships with the employers, understanding where the skills needs are, understanding where the opportunities are, and really focusing in that relationship between the gaps and the issues and the supply is really, I think, where a lot of the work will also happen, to complement what Dina said. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you all. We're going to have to wrap up now as our time is up, unfortunately. So we've learned some good points about what the gender gaps look like and what you as education institutions can do to close that gap. So thank you very much to our speakers, Hiromichi, Sanola, and Dina, for taking the time to share your knowledge. Thank you everyone for joining. And if you have any questions about the IFC Vitae program and how we can help your institution on employability outcomes, please don't hesitate to contact us through the contact details on our website, which is included on all our invites and will be included in the thank you email we send out later. So looking forward to seeing you next time at our next webinar, and thank you everyone.